Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, and welcome to a bit of a wrap-up discussion video on my most recent tournament that I hosted on my Discord server from February to early March 2021. And I'm just going to simply be running through kind of how the tournament overall progressed and what ended up happening as far as the deck breakdown is concerned, and I'll be going over each of the individual top 16 decks as well. If you do want to play in the next tournament, feel free to go ahead and sign up in the Discord server, links in the description box below. Signups are open now until next Friday, March 19th, so you have until then to get your signups in. We'll be under the new ban list, of course. And also, if you want to see all the players' deck lists and not just the ones that are going to be in this video being top 16, there will be a massive spreadsheet to that as well. And if you want to catch up in the feature match department and watch all the feature matches over again, also in the description is going to be the playlist to that. But anyways, this is my third time trying to record this video. I've had a lot of technical difficulties, so I'm just going to try and get through this as concisely as I can. So this is going to be the deck breakdown here. And this is pretty expected overall as far as what the metagame is concerned. We've had 77 players, which is the biggest turnout so far, so I'm really happy about that. But yeah, we see a lot of the kind of just mainstays of last format. We see Drytron, Virtual World, Jasionek, Eldlich, and Tri-Brigade really being prominent here. The outlier, of course, being Earth Machines, but that's primarily because Aerosol TCG is, of course, notorious for that deck, and he actually won my previous tournament with this deck. So he brought in a couple of new players because of that. But apart from that, of course, I think everything else is pretty standard and self-explanatory. Next will be the top cut breakdown, and this I think is also pretty interesting. We see a lot of Drytron conversion, 5 out of 7 as a matter of fact, which is very strong. And that's pretty interesting to see because towards the end of the format, last format, we saw Drytron kind of on a downtrend, just because a lot of weaknesses were very exploitable. But that being said, of course, the deck was still quite strong, and in comparison to just a bigger field, the deck is slated to do well. Of course, pre-ban list. Rest in peace, Ben 10 and Carrier. But we see Earth Machines do well, and we see a bunch of one-of decks, some of which are more mainstream and more expected, like Dogmatika Eldlich, Virtual World, and Dragon Link, and others which are less expected, like Dogmatika Myutant, Paleozoic Frogs, and Mathmech. And we'll be going each of these individual top 16 decks right now, so let's get started without further ado. So first off is going to be Adamancipator TCG's first place Dragon Link deck. So huge congrats to him for taking this down. And you'll notice that this deck won pre-ban list. It beat all the VFDs. It beat all the Drytrons. This is scary because the deck, of course, didn't take any hits, as everyone knows. So this deck definitely is looking to be one of, if not the best deck in the upcoming format. Very strong, of course. And one thing to note about Alan's build in particular is that it's actually not playing any of the Dragon Maid cards. So if you want to play this deck in real life and don't want to shave $90 for Chainmail Dragon Maids like myself, that is a good sign, and this is a good template to kind of work off of. We see things like double boot sector launch is just kind of a focus on grinding with rockets, which was kind of not too uncommon to see last time or last year around this time. We saw Shumping play kind of like Dragon Link with a lot of rockets and play double boot sector himself. Obviously, Shumping was playing a lot of rockets in that build. But I digress. This is kind of like harkening back to some combination of that list and also the September 2020 Dragon Link decks that focus on a lot of just really strong board building cards. So it's really cool to see that this deck has a lot of ways to kind of go about it. But it's Dragon Link. It's really strong. It's one they have to definitely respect. Something to think about as well is the Quacky Mirror YGO in the side deck. This is something you can bring off of Spheres to help beat the mirror match. And boy, the mirror match is going to be a lot, or very popular. Like there's going to be a lot of mirror matches. It's going to be super pervasive moving into the next format, so be on the lookout for it. Definitely be sure to keep your eye out and pick up a copy yourself if you want to play the deck and are planning on playing a lot of competitive events. Apart from that, not really too much to say. Zeus is a little bit non-standard here, but also I believe he mentioned that he was missing Appaloosa in here, so that's something to kind of think about. But in general, I mean, it's Dragon Link, right? Not a ton of deviation from like other lists apart from, again, the Dragon Maid package, but I think in general you could see a lot of lists looking quite similar to this one. So big congrats again to Alan, and now let's move on into second place, which is Agent Shadow's Virtual World deck. This is pre-ban list, of course, so it's going to be VFD Turbo naturally, but this is a very interesting deck to kind of think about as far as how it can adapt moving into the next upcoming format. There's a lot of different options here. I think some people will kind of think about Zulkin plus Crystal Wing setups, and then going into Muddy Mud Dragon to make a copy of Dragoon. Just trying to go like full combo and seeing how far you can get with that. I'm not entirely sure what will become mainstream, but that is one option. Another option is to maybe go and try and just end on like Chuche, Shen, and like a bunch of hand traps, maybe drawing some off like Charge Warrior and Croc and stuff. That could be sort of a way to play the deck as like a semi-control style almost. And then a third way maybe you can play the deck, which I think a lot of people would kind of immediately gravitate towards, is the Gothams route. And you can see it's actually being played here as well. But yeah, Gothams is a pretty interesting option. I'm not sure how amazing it's going to be. The upcoming LCS will maybe tell us a lot as far as kind of the introductory directions that this deck is going to potentially go towards. But I think this deck will be experimented with quite a lot. It has room to definitely adapt because the main deck is going to be largely unchanged, if at all, unless you want to really make like Beatrice plays, sending a lot of different like things like Farfa, and I've seen really weird stuff like sending like Quatless to add like double evolution pill to summon out Pankratops. I think Jesse Cotton and Duelist Academy were kind of testing that on stream. Like some really wacky stuff that people were kind of testing, but yeah, to like test out with all the options, right? So that becomes mainstream, maybe that's something you can pivot towards as well. Notably, there's no Zeus in this extra deck. I probably would make room for that, but ultimately it's Virtual World, not really too much to say here. Next is Purple Midnight's third place Dogmatika Eldlich list, and boy, this is another deck that I think people were expecting to get touched as far as Eldlich is concerned. I personally thought the deck was in a decent spot, so I didn't really think that it needed hits. Other people will beg to disagree, of course. But that being said, of course, this deck I think has an interesting spot because a lot of its strengths came from the fact that it was able to adapt to Virtual World and VFD in particular in a very, very specific fashion, being of course just not really operating on the same axis as it at all. But at the same time, we might see some of these traps fall out of favor based on what decks ended up coming to the forefront of the metagame. We might see traps just not be as good. I think that really the deck or the format wasn't as much of a control format as people would make it out to be. I think that simply the response that this deck had to BFD was good enough to where this deck could kind of compete. But ultimately, this is going to be an anti-meta strategy, right? It's not going to be the one defining the metagame itself. Apart from of course what Synchro Eldlich did, but this is a completely different approach, right? But yeah, we're going to see how exactly people are going to change their trap lineups. There's 23 traps in here, so they got a lot of space to kind of work with. But this is Dogmatika Eldlich. Next is going to be fourth place, which is Jeeves McAsian's Rock deck, Adamancipator Prank Kids. This is one that I am personally kind of partial towards. I do like this deck quite a lot. I enjoy playing it. But it has a lot of glaring weaknesses. First off is the fact that, of course, when you get interrupted, it can be hard to build a board that has good enough follow-ups, and your boards are somewhat breakable. But I think more debilitating of a weakness right now is going to be the fact that Go Second Equalizers, Haymakers, are really good again. Things like Dark Ruler and Forbidden Droplet. Those cards get a lot better when you don't have to really contend about opening specifically hand traps to deal with VFD, right? So in kind of the context of that, it really, really becomes a lot more difficult to play a deck that just doesn't have native answers to those types of cards and just hope to only draw hand traps like in addition to that, because at that point, you might as well just play a better combo deck. But that being said, this deck does have still the capacity to just build some of the best combo decks if you are able to play Interrupted going first, and that definitely cannot be underestimated. So we will see if this deck continues to kind of keep up with the meta, the way it shifts. But I do think that some certain side of cards might throw a thorn into this deck's side. Next, we're going to move into the top 8 lists, and first off, we're going to start out with Aerosol TCG's Earth Machine deck, or Dozer Control as he dubs it. This is relatively standard to what he's been playing for quite some time. I think the 27 cards in this deck that are standard are everything in the top 3 rows, minus the double urgent schedule and Call by the Grave. I think the other 27 are very, very well established by now, and everything else I think could either be just additional options for going second. Obviously, this card's not really great going first, but going second, it's an insanely good starter card. Maybe you side it in the future. You can see a second or third copy here. But you can also just play hand traps, as Aerosol has elected to do in this particular build. Last time he played like Trap Tricks and I believe Dinomiscus. He's moved to like Torrentials before, and now he's on hand traps. Just anything that you can really grab off a tunnel is good. I think in the context of the previous format with VFD and Ben 10s running around, you gotta just try and draw hand traps specifically to not lose the combo instantly game 1. So that's like a nice kind of adaptation. But I think moving forward, you can maybe drop these. And if you want to play like maybe droplets or other things, that is definitely a good option. Something to note in the side deck here, besides of course the aforementioned Urgent Schedule, is the copy of Alley of Justice Cycle Reader. This card is actually searchable via Geargigan X. And if you want more info on that, definitely check out Aerosol's channel. I will put a link to that in the description box below if you want to check out his combo videos. But he has had ways to kind of make specifically anti-Drytron combos work. But if you also just want an introduction or a primer to the deck, his channel is also a great place to start, where it shows basically the essential functions of how the deck is trying to operate. Of course, the deck does have a VFD sort of win condition, or just a way to kind of set up before committing to the Brutodozer. But that's not really that needed, and the deck can really just have alternative lines of play. So it's not contingent on this card whatsoever. So this is Earth Machines. It's picking up quite a bit of steam, pun intended, by the way. But we'll just have to see if it continues to kind of evolve moving forward. Next is Burrito Man 93 on Drytron. This is the deck that I think was the biggest loser of the ban list, if I had to say, if I had to pick one, because I think Ben 1001 by itself was maybe workable, but I actually would argue, after thinking about it and kind of testing around with the deck for the past like 30 hours or so, that the Union Carrier hit was, I kind of want to say it was more detrimental, right? Because you gotta think about it. The entire reason why Drytron is able to kind of just utilize Ben 10 as much as it did was that it would have continuous ways to just get access to Drytron names. If you don't have that many Drytrons, it doesn't matter if your hand is 5 Ben 10s, right? If you can't trigger them, it doesn't do anything. That's not to say that Ben 10 didn't deserve the limit necessarily outright, but that's to say that, of course, the Drytron access is what made Ben 10 as good as it was. And just the fact that Carrier was the way to consistently, from your extra deck, get another access to Drytrons that you were missing in your combo really cannot be overstated. So because we are in a period right now before Lightning Overdrive where we just simply don't have the Xyz monster, it's going to be really tough to fill in that void. And I'm going to keep talking here because I'm going to go over 2 more Drytron lists that made top 8 because all 3 of these players made top 8 with Drytron. But yeah, continuing on with that sort of point is just the fact that, of course, we have to find different ways to either try and hard open more Drytrons, which can lead to somewhat clunkier hands and just less streamlined builds, or we can try and like find alternative win conditions. I know people are trying to test ways to make Beatrice work. I really do like the Megalith cards. I think they're cool as well, just because of the fact that full can recycle Ben 10 and also turn itself into level 6. So that paves the way for things like Solar Purity on Light and maybe even like Cyber Angel Edaton, which some people are testing to make Beatrice, and that sounds like another Drytron. So maybe that's an option moving forward. I'm not sure if that's going to be mainstream. It's going to be really tough to, I think, pilot this deck and adapt. Because unlike VW, where you don't have to change too much with the main deck, but only really decide what your end goal is going to be, this deck has to kind of change its entire identity. Because there's a lot of things that like you don't really think about, but they add up. One of the biggest examples is, of course, Cyber Angel Natasha right here, which, of course, if you're just playing one Ben 10, is it really worth it to play the Natasha at that point when you're getting one Snatch Steal-like effect? Of course, the card's still good, but you're going to have to play maybe other Cyber Angels if you want to play that card, which, again, some people are testing Edaton, but we're not sure if that's going to be mainstream. But this is the Megalith Drytron build from Jax LMS, and this might be a good kind of prototype to look at. Vanity's Ruler is also something that maybe people will have to cut, just because I think Manju is going to be even more important than ever, especially if you're going down the route of like Megaliths and you want to like consistently search full and stuff. Another like strength of the Megaliths is that full is searchable via Preparation of Rites if you're still playing that card. So that's like something else to kind of think about, is that just more versatility is good there in that department. But yeah, like all those little things is like your deck really operated in a very specific formula, right? Like you're trying to get Drytrons on board, you're trying to trigger Ben 10 along the way, you're trying to go for Union Carrier, and then go for Ben 10, etc., etc. And because you don't have Union Carrier, you don't have as many ways to get Drytron names, which means you can't abuse Ben 10 as much. But then what you replace Ben 10 with, and then like how do you account for the Natasha void? Like there's so many questions you have to answer, and like all has to flow very, very smoothly and cohesively. And I'm not sure if there's a great way to kind of patch those holes up until at least Lightning Overdrive. So I'll have to wait and see. Maybe the Dream package, as we see here, will become like a secondary fallback win condition, but at that point, there's other combo decks to play, right? So it's really tough to kind of think about how Drytron is going to go moving forward. Next are going to be the top 16 lists. So we got Graboid Fan 31, excuse me, on Dinosaur. And this is an interesting deck for sure, because it might be, again, reminiscent of September 2020, where not only was Dragon Link at the forefront of the metagame, but we might see Dino come back as well in a very similar fashion and occupying a similar niche. This deck definitely has the ability to just tailor its go second tools. You can maybe switch away from hand traps and go again more into the word breakers, which are once again more viable in a format where you no longer have to just hard open a hand trap specifically to stop VFD or lose. You can really rely on sort of maybe these cards, especially with Pot of Prosperity, which excels at digging for side deck cards and not really hand traps, especially going second. So like maybe things like Dark Ruler and Forbidden Droplet, Lightning Storm, and even Mystic Mine, which this deck definitely uses. Is one of the best decks that can use Mystic Mine, but Mystic Mine was just not great last format because of Chuche and Conquistador and stuff. But moving forward, that might be an option, right? So I do think that Dinosaur is slated to do quite well, just because it's able to kind of manipulate whatever it's trying to do in the department of just non-engine defensive cards. And Prosperity, again, I think is super sick at not only, again, digging for your engine, but just going for the blowout Haymaker go second cards. But overall, I would say this is pretty standard for what Dinosaur would look like in that kind of particular instance. Next up is Grand Soil, also on Earth Machines. It's very similar to Aerosol's list. Maybe some changes here and there. For example, the second copy of Bullet Train in the main, and things like Forbidden Droplet making an appearance as well. Things like the third Urgent Schedule come to mind. But overall, I think the general win condition of this deck is going to be largely intact. You can see, of course, the sideboard into more hand traps. Tarantulas a cool card with this deck just because actually your Citadel does get to trigger off of it because it can summon itself even if it gets destroyed by your own card effects. But overall, I would say that all things considered, this looks very, very similar to Aerosol's list. Next up is Hands to Midnight, also on Drytron. Again, this is a deck that really just needs a hard look in the mirror as far as what is going to be, what's going to be playable, and it's tough, very, very tough. I've heard some people say that maybe like you can't even really play like a fairy package anymore just because like Ben 10. Like, there's only one of it. It's like you have to devote a lot of spaces. Maybe it's just like not viable. I really do not know what the win condition of this deck is going to be moving forward. It's going to be really interesting to find out. But as far as the format before the ban list is concerned, this is very, very similar to pretty much every other Drytron list out there. Next is going to be Sheikah 179 on Tri-Brigade without Lyrilusk, so it's not buried up. This is a deck that's interesting because of the fact that, it really plays some cool text like the Fabled Cereal. We saw that as a way to kind of just make Herald of the Arclight. We see Reborn Tengu make an appearance, which is really, really interesting. And I think that with the Link 2 that's coming out for this deck, the one that I believe searches spells and traps, you could really make a case for just pure Tri-Brigade. And we've even seen some prototypal builds in the TCG see some success. So that's something to kind of think about as well. This also being one example, right? But yeah, I think that this deck has a pretty interesting place in the metagame because some people argue that it's simply a meta call, especially with like the Wind Barrier statue. Other people think that it has enough legs on its own to kind of just make a stand. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not really sure if it's going to become up there with things like Dragon Link and stuff. But at the end of the day, I think this definitely is still a competent deck, and it can have enough variability in its plays to be able to still keep up moving forward past the ban list. Excuse me. Next up is going to be Sinindo on Dogmatika Myutant. I'm going to be honest here, I'm not a mutant expert, so I'm not going to pretend to know what the exact game plan of this deck is. However, what I will say is that the matches that I featured on the channel were not super representative of what the deck is trying to do, because the one in Swiss that I showed off really didn't show the mutant cards themselves, and then the one in Top Cut, unfortunately, was just Sinindo not being able to really play the deck just by virtue of bricking in the matchup and stuff. So what I would do is I'll actually link a couple of his replays from Swiss rounds if you want to see the mutants themselves operate, if you guys want to get a better feel for how this deck is trying to accomplish what it's trying to do, because I'm not going to really be able to elucidate that very, very well. So I'm just going to move on into the next one. This is going to be Super Peludo on, it looks like Drytron here. Yeah, it's Drytron. Yep, Drytron. Not much to say. Pot of Prosperity is also something in this deck to kind of consider. Maybe it's a way to dig for the missing extenders. Maybe it's a way to kind of just try and get Ben 10 access a bit more. You never know. Like, that might be an option. Again, we've seen Pot of Prosperity already in current lists, so that might be a thing moving forward. But again, it's just so hard to kind of like think about what this deck is going to do. You even see like Purple Light here in the side deck. But yeah, this deck really is going to struggle, I think, just keeping up. And that is kind of just the end of that. Next up is Tifoste on Paleozoic Frogs. This is a really interesting list. We see Backjack, just like kind of borrowing from BA, getting more normal traps. We see Sangam, which is a way to actually search Swap Frog when linked away for Almirage. And we see Fury of Karyushin, which is a pretty cool way to just get more access to Tarantula. And that's like one of the best cards in the previous format, right? So overall, I think this deck is cool. Again, it's not really like the control decks were defining the metagame last format. They are generally just going to be responsive decks, which makes it kind of hard to ever classify them as the best deck. But that being said, of course, the deck is still able to adapt fairly well. Side deck cards might be a bit of an issue, but you kind of just take the good with the bad. And that is kind of it with that. So Paleozoic Frogs, cool to see this deck make top 16. Oh, and then I still did that. Next up is going to be Wintry, and that's going to be the last one. And this is going to be her Mathmech deck. So you can see pretty interesting choices. The absence of Lady Debug, just trying to lose out to less disruptions, right? and say go for extenders that really are less reliant on like specific things resolving. So it's cool to see for sure in this deck. You see the hand traps. We see double super factorial, which a lot of people who are especially not familiar with the deck probably won't see coming. But even those who are probably won't really see the second super factorial, which is nice because she's playing 2 Alan Bersham. Also, there's desires in here, so maybe that's why you wouldn't want to really risk 1. But that being said, of course, Mathmech is a deck that's obviously very unexplored. I'm not really sure if the popularity of this deck is what's keeping it down per se, but I will say that this deck definitely has the ability to interact in ways that other decks aren't prepared to deal with if your opponent especially does not know what the cards do. So just with summoning location on your opponent's turn, like that is devastating, and people, if they aren't respecting it, they could definitely easily lose the game off of the back of that alone. So that is going to be it for all the top 16 matches, or not matches, I said matches again, decks for this tournament. I really spent a long time in this video because I tried to record multiple times. So it would really mean a lot if you guys did leave a like and subscribe if you're new here, if you want to see more content similar to this style of video. Over the weekend, I'll be doing a lot of LCS content. I'm not sure if I'm going to be pumping out like a ton of videos since I've already been doing a ton for my tournament. So we'll have to wait and see. I don't want to like really hardcore burn myself out here. So I will be covering the event. I'm not sure how much I'm going to do, especially for day 1. But definitely be on the lookout for those videos, which will be coming tomorrow and Sunday. But anyways, thanks guys for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more informative and creative Yu-Gi-Oh content. If you want to, you can follow me on all social media platforms or support me with the links in the description box as usual. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.